This is not a video blog. This is a story. You shit loudly, ma'am, announced a grizzled yet oddly formal voice from an adjacent stall. Maddie remained silent. It was an impossible remark spoken in an even more impossible voice, identical that of her old school teacher who had drunk herself mean before class each day so that she could express resentment toward Maddie, who was in many ways a model student. Could the old bitch's voice really be haunting her now, 11 years later, a freelance designer infinitely distant from the scrutiny of higher authority? She realized she had been clenching her sphincter muscle ever since the remark was misheard, so she sighed and let loose. Maddie gasped as she heard the terrible noise throughout the stall, suddenly unable to shift her focus away from it. A furious knock on the left wall of the stall. "Ma'am, I am not going to ask you again." "Ask me what?" Maddie screamed. "Some of us like peace when we use the restroom, ma'am. The only place we can get away from all the fuss." Maddie bent down so as to hopefully catch some view of her washroom neighbor, and sure enough, there were the same painful-looking high heels with which she had grown uncomfortably familiar after so many punishments in her 7th year. As Maddie reached the lowest point in her bend, an eruption sounded from behind her. "Now you'll either look into some anal stretching exercises or you won't return here again and again each morning so that I have to put up with your shit." The teacher hissed that final word in the coldest way that teachers always say things when they have to put up with even more repetition than is required by their job. Now too self-conscious to complete defecation, Maddie proceeded to hurriedly wipe, flush, and pick up her bag. Not necessarily in that order. "You can't do anything quietly, can you?" came the drunken authority. "Fuss, fuss, 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 fuss." Maddie slammed the stall door and ran to the furthest sink to wash her hands. The voice called again. "You can wash with vigor, but you'll never erase the fact that you shit loudly." "Fuck you!" Maddie boldly tore a paper towel from the dispenser as lightning tears bark from a tree, and nearly broke the restroom door on her way out. She entered back into the office cafeteria, too decorated and warm by all the noise to seem lonely or officious, and exasperated began the slow daily procession of sliding trays along the countertop. By the time she had reached the non-vegetarian section, she recognized the man in front of her as a coworker from her design sector, who she had never spoken to before. "We were in the same training session, weren't we?" she asked. Everyone in the room seemed to turn toward her. "Oh, me?" He found it difficult to believe that her volume had been reserved for him. "Yeah," he said quietly, no longer looking at her, shoveling the last bits of meat onto his plate. It was a way of breaking the conversation, she knew, and so she said nothing else from then until his departure at the vegetarian section. He had used the same spoon to stir vegetables and rice into his chicken, and a piece of the meat had fallen into the vegetable serving tray. She was sure that she no longer wished to talk to him when she observed that, rather than acknowledging responsibility for his mistake and retrieving the fallen piece of meat, he fled the scene in hope that no one would notice. "What will you have to drink?" The man behind the counter seemed impatient with her today. "Water, just water," Maddie said. "Water, groaned the cashier. Maddie turned to the man behind her, who was visibly from an executive sector, and laughingly noted that the cashier didn't seem too overjoyed with her choice of beverage. The executive was not amused. He glared her down with an expression that suggested she might have unknowingly said something extremely incorrect. She kept her mouth shut. "Your water, is that all?" "Oh, my food too," she chuckled. The cashier looked her up and down for a moment, seemingly annoyed by her very presence. A chill rocked her spine. "That'll be $8.49. Producer's card?" "Oh, no, I'm in design." She froze. "There are black specks floating around in my drink." The cashier bent over slightly to look. "That there are," he confirmed flatly. "What are those? Can I have another cup?" The cashier picked up the paper cup, turned to his side, and walked back into the kitchen, all in one robotic sweep. Maddie apologized to those waiting behind her, relinquishing herself of any blame by acknowledging the absurdity of the situation. "It's okay," the executive behind her grunted. The cashier's footsteps returned, and this time he set the cup on the counter without saying a word. She looked into the cup again. "There's no difference," she said, a hint of temper in her tone. "The black specks are still there." The man behind her groaned. The cashier looked off to his side and muttered something she could not hear.
What?
He turned to her and their irises aligned, his flickering.
Because you shit loudly.